I'm Alex Harrison. I'm 32 years old, and at my parents' 30th wedding anniversary party. A party I paid for. My own mother screamed at me to get out in front of 100 of their friends and family. Before I tell you how that single, humiliating moment led to the complete and utter collapse of their multi-generational family business, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always good to know who I'm talking to. The crystal glasses on the tables seemed to vibrate with the force of her voice. You're not welcome here. Get out. My mother, Martha, her face a mask of purple fury, pointed a trembling finger toward the grand oak doors of the ballroom. 100 conversations died at once. The string quartet, which had been playing a soft, elegant melody, faltered into a discordant silence. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, all I could hear was the frantic ringing in my own ears. I saw my younger brother, Ryan, the golden child, standing beside her. He had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but his new fiancée, Vanessa, who stood clutching his arm, had a look of pure, venomous satisfaction on her face. My father, George, the man who was supposed to be my protector, stood a step behind them, his gaze fixed intently on the intricate pattern of the ballroom carpet. He hunched his shoulders, making himself smaller, wishing he could disappear. He didn't say a word. He never did. There was no explosion from my end. No shouting match. The anger that should have boiled over had been simmering for so many years it had been pressure-cooked into something else. Something cold, hard, and terrifyingly clear. I looked directly at my mother, whose chest was heaving with rage. Then I let my eyes drift to my father. I held his gaze until he finally, painfully, looked up at me for a fraction of a second. His eyes filled with a familiar mix of shame and helplessness before darting away again. That fleeting glance was all the answer I needed. I straightened my tie, a pointless gesture of composure in the middle of total chaos. I gave a single, sharp nod and said one word, my voice clear and steady in the cavernous silence. Okay. Then I turned my back on all of them and walked out of that ballroom. I didn't rush. Every step was deliberate, measured. I could feel 100 pairs of eyes burning into my back. As the heavy oak doors closed behind me with a soft, final thud, I didn't feel shame or sadness. I felt free. The air in the hallway tasted cleaner. Sitting in the driver's seat of my car in the dimly lit parking lot, the engine silent, I didn't call my friends to vent. I didn't drive off into the night. I took a deep, steadying breath and pulled out my phone, its screen a stark blue light in the darkness. First, I opened my email. I went to my drafts folder and found an email I had composed 2 days prior, a contingency plan I had prayed to God I would never need. The subject line was simple and brutal: rescission of share transfer agreement and cessation of financial support. The recipient was my lawyer, Daniel. I stared at the screen for a full 10 seconds, my thumb hovering over the send button. It was a declaration of war. My thumb pressed down. A small whoosh sound signaled it was gone. An arrow shot into the heart of my family. Next, I dialed my credit card's premium service line. A pleasant, professional voice answered on the second ring. Good evening, I said, my voice betraying no emotion. My name is Alex Harrison. I'd like to dispute a charge. The amount is $50,000. The vendor is the Grand Oak Ballroom. The reason? Services not rendered as agreed upon. A chapter of my life, a lifetime of trying, had just ended. A war I never wanted was about to begin, and I had just fired the first shot. To understand why I would write that email, why I would make that call, why I would detonate a $50,000 bomb in the middle of my family, you have to understand that this was never about a party. It was about a promise. It was about my grandfather. My grandfather, Arthur Harrison, was a man built of different stuff. He came home from the Korean War with calloused hands and a quiet determination. He started Harrison Textiles with a single second-hand loom in the garage of his tiny post-war house. He built it into a respected local business, not through shortcuts or slick talk, but through relentless work and a handshake that was as good as any contract. He was a man of few words, but his eyes saw everything, especially me. While my parents, Martha and George, saw my obsession with books and computers as something strange, almost an inconvenient deviation from their world of tangible things. My grandfather saw a different kind of strength. He was the one who bought me my first chemistry set, the one who taught me how to play chess, the one who really listened when I talked about my dreams. I remember one sweltering summer afternoon. I must have been about 10. I came home clutching a blue ribbon, my chest puffed out with pride. I had won the county science fair for a ridiculously complex volcano model that actually smoked. I burst through the back door, ready for a hero's welcome. But the house was quiet. I found a note on the fridge. Gone to Ryan's soccer tournament. Be back late. It was a tournament for the regional finals, one he wasn't even playing in. He was the team's mascot, a title he'd been given after faking a twisted ankle to get out of practice for 2 weeks. I sat on the porch steps, the blue ribbon feeling flimsy in my hands, the victory tasting like ash. A little while later, my grandfather's old pickup truck rumbled into the driveway. He got out slowly, his joints stiff, and saw me sitting there. He didn't say anything at first. He just sat down next to me, the old wood of the steps groaning under his weight. "What's that you got there, champ?" he asked, nodding at the ribbon. "I won," I mumbled, staring at my shoes. "They're not here." He looked at the note, then back at me. He put his heavy, warm hand on my shoulder, a hand that smelled faintly of machine oil and sawdust. "Your head, Alex," he said, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "It's built for big things, things that most people can't see or understand. That's a gift. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like it's not. But your heart," he tapped my chest gently with a thick finger. "Your heart has to remember where it came from. This business, it's more than just fabric and thread. It's our family's story. It's my story. You take care of it, you hear? For me." I looked up at him, into his clear, honest eyes, and I promised him I would. That promise became a lodestar in my life. Years later, when he passed away, his will revealed he'd left his remaining shares in the company in a trust. He'd structured it so that I, and only I, could purchase them for a set price when I turned 30. It was his way of ensuring a piece of me, the son he never had, would always be anchored to his legacy. That price was $50,000. So, the anniversary party wasn't just a lavish gift from a successful son. It was the vehicle for me to fulfill that deathbed promise. I was buying my grandfather's shares and celebrating my parents at the same time. It was supposed to be a beautiful, symbolic gesture of healing and unity. Of course, my business partner, Sarah, thought I was a sentimental fool. Sarah is my opposite in every way. Pragmatic, unsentimental, and she could smell a bad deal through a concrete wall. She'd been my partner since we were two broke kids with a big idea, and she knew my family's dynamics better than anyone. 2 weeks before the party, she called me into her office. Our company, a tech firm I'd built from nothing, occupied a sleek, modern space of glass and brushed steel. It was a world away from the dusty, old-fashioned offices of Harrison Textiles. On her massive, curved monitor, she had their financials spread out like a patient's grim x-rays. "Alex, we need to have a serious talk," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. She gestured at the screen. "I ran the deep dive on Harrison Textiles, like you asked. It's not just bad, Alex. It's catastrophic. It's a legacy business, Sarah. It's cyclical," I said, the defensive words tasting like cardboard in my mouth. "This isn't a cycle. This is a death spiral," she countered, spinning the monitor toward me. "Look, their debt-to-equity ratio is insane. They're using new, high-interest loans to make payments on older, slightly less high-interest loans. Their inventory is obsolete, their accounts receivable are aging past 120 days, and their profit margins, well, there aren't any. Ryan is running it like his personal fiefdom, and your parents are letting him. This $50,000, it's not an investment. It's you plugging a single hole in a dam that's about to burst. It's a promise to my grandfather," I repeated, my jaw tightening. "I'm buying his shares. It's symbolic." Sarah leaned forward, her expression softening from exasperation to genuine concern. "I understand that. I really do. I know how much your grandfather meant to you. But your family, Alex, they don't operate on symbols. They operate on survival. They don't see your promise. They see a lifeline. They see a blank check. Please just be careful. Go in with your eyes open. I should have listened. Every red flag she pointed out was one I had already seen and willfully ignored. I was so desperate for this one grand gesture to finally work, to finally earn me a seat at the table, that I blinded myself to the truth. The hope was a drug. This dynamic had poisoned my entire life. When I got a full academic scholarship to a top engineering school, my mother's first reaction, after a brief, tight smile, was, "Well, that's a relief. Now we don't have to worry about that. We need to save every penny for Ryan's business degree." Ryan, who had barely graduated high school with a D average, and would go on to drop out of community college twice before my father gave him a pity job at the family company. I remembered the day Ryan, then 18, crashed the brand new Mustang my parents had bought him for graduation. He'd been drinking with friends and wrapped it around a telephone pole. No one was seriously hurt, a miracle really, but the car was an accordion of crushed metal. I'd never seen my mother so frantic. She didn't yell at him. She didn't punish him. She rushed to the scene and held him on the side of the road, rocking him like he was a small child who had fallen off his bike, whispering, "It's okay, baby, it's okay. Mommy will fix it. We'll make it all go away." She spent a week on the phone with expensive lawyers and insurance agents, pulling every string she could to bury the incident, to keep a DUI off his record, to protect his future. From that day on, I understood her love for Ryan wasn't just favoritism. It was a desperate, fearful, all-consuming obsession. She saw him as fragile, an extension of herself, and any failure of his was a catastrophic failure of hers. My independence, my success, became a harsh spotlight shining on his inadequacies. The more I achieved on my own, the more she seemed to resent me for it, and the more she coddled him, protecting him from a world I was forced to navigate by myself. So, a week before the party, when I sat down with my father in his dusty, wood-paneled office to sign the final papers for the share transfer, I ignored the slight tremor in his hand as he pushed the documents across the desk. I ignored the way he couldn't quite meet my eyes, focusing instead on a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. "This is a good thing, son," he mumbled, his voice thick. "Your grandfather, he would be very proud." A swell of pride, foolish and naive, rose in my chest. I was doing the right thing. I was bridging the gap between my world of code and algorithms and their world of looms and ledgers. I was honoring my grandfather. I was investing in my family. As I drove to that party, the confirmation of the $50,000 payment sitting in my digital wallet, I let myself feel that flicker of a 10-year-old boy's hope one last time. This time, I told myself, feeling the weight of the promise I was about to fulfill, this time will be different. It was different, all right, just not in any way I could have possibly imagined. The Grand Oak Ballroom was a place trying desperately to cling to a bygone era of elegance, a perfect metaphor for my parents' aspirations. The crystal chandeliers hung from the high, ornate ceilings, casting a warm, forgiving glow on the tables draped in heavy white linens. But if you looked closely, you could see the water stains on the ceiling tiles and the faint wear on the velvet curtains. It was a beautiful illusion. As I walked in, an usher with a practiced, impersonal smile checked my name off a list on a clipboard. "Ah, Mr. Harrison, right this way." He led me past the round tables near the front, past the smiling faces of my parents' friends, past the long head table that was clearly the center of the universe tonight. He led me to table 17. It was tucked into a dark corner, a stone's throw from the swinging doors of the kitchen, offering a lovely view of bussers coming and going with trays of dirty dishes. The message was as subtle as a punch to the gut. I took my seat. From my vantage point, I had a clear view of the head table. My parents, Martha and George, sat in the center, beaming, and seated in the places of honor on either side of them, my brother, Ryan, and his new fiancée, Vanessa. Of course, I scanned the room and my stomach tightened. I recognized many of the guests, and they weren't just old family friends. I saw Mr. Henderson, who owned the dye company that Harrison Textiles owed a fortune to. I saw the manager of the local bank that held their primary business loan. I saw a handful of other suppliers and creditors, all dressed in their Sunday best, sipping champagne. My father, George, was making the rounds, moving from table to table, his smile a little too wide, his handshake a little too firm. He looked less like the host of a celebratory party and more like a politician working a room, shoring up votes, reassuring his constituents that everything was fine. A cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. This wasn't a celebration. It was a carefully staged performance for the benefit of their creditors. Vanessa, a sharp-featured woman who worked as a junior accountant at some mid-level firm, had always looked at me with a poorly concealed mixture of envy and disdain. She saw my success not as something I had earned, but as something that had been unfairly withheld from her and Ryan. Tonight, she was in her element, the queen consort. She and my mother had their heads together constantly, whispering like schoolgirls. Every so often, their eyes would flick in my direction, followed by a shared, knowing smirk. I didn't need to hear the words to know their content. Look at him, sitting all alone in his $1,000 suit. Guess money can't buy you a personality. He probably thinks this is all about him. So arrogant. I tried to rise above it. I was here to honor my parents. I was here to fulfill a promise to my grandfather. During a lull in the endless, self-congratulatory speeches, I made my way toward the head table, a glass of champagne in my hand as a peace offering. Mom, Dad, I started, trying to inject warmth into my voice. Congratulations on 30 years. That's an incredible milestone. I wish you both many more. My mother gave me a tight, brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes. Thank you, Alex, for the contribution. She said the word contribution as if it were a business expense, not a gift from a son. Before I could respond, Vanessa, ever the opportunist, slid into the conversation, linking her arm possessively through Ryan's. Oh, Alex, it's so wonderful you could make it, she cooed, her voice dripping with a false sweetness that set my teeth on edge. And perfect timing. Ryan and I have some very special news of our own. Ryan, looking like a deer caught in the high beams of an oncoming truck as usual, cleared his throat nervously. Yeah, we're engaged. He fumbled in his pocket and produced a ring that was far too large and flashy for Vanessa's slender finger. Oh wow, that's fantastic. Congratulations, I said, and despite everything, I meant it. A small part of me would always want my little brother to be happy. I raised my glass. To Ryan and Vanessa, may you have a lifetime of happiness. Vanessa's face hardened instantly. Her performance for the crowd was over. She turned to my mother, her lower lip trembling with theatrical outrage. See? Can you believe him? He's trying to make it about him. This was supposed to be our moment to announce it to the family, and he's hijacking it with his toast. I was dumbfounded. I was trying to... What? I was celebrating them. But my mother, already primed to see the worst in me, bought the performance hook, line, and sinker. Alex, for once in your life, can you not make everything about you? She hissed, her voice low and venomous so the nearby tables couldn't hear. This is our night, and it's Ryan's night. Stop trying to steal the spotlight. It was then, in that moment of stunned silence, that I overheard the whisper that changed everything. Vanessa, thinking I was reeling from my mother's attack, leaned close to Ryan's ear. Her whisper was sharp, panicked, and utterly clear in the relative quiet. Just get the check from him tonight. That's all that matters, she breathed. I already told the bank manager we have a $50,000 cash infusion coming. If we can show them the check on Monday morning, they'll agree to restructure the loan. Don't you dare mess this up, Ryan. And there it was. The curtain wasn't just pulled back. It was ripped to shreds. The cold knot in my stomach turned to a solid block of ice. My promise to my grandfather, my gesture of family unity, my hope for reconciliation. It had all been twisted into a financial instrument. It was collateral. It was a prop in their desperate, pathetic play to stay afloat for one more day. I must have looked as shell-shocked as I felt, because that's when my mother decided to escalate things to their final, brutal conclusion. She saw the look on my face, not as the profound hurt it was, but as judgment, as condescension. "What's that look on your face?" she demanded, her voice rising now, drawing the attention of the nearby tables. "You think you're so much better than us, don't you? Coming in here with your fancy suit and your big money, looking down on our life's work, on your father and your brother." "Mom, that's not what's happening," I said, my own voice strained as I tried to keep it from shaking. "This isn't what I thought it was." "I know exactly what's happening," she shot back, her voice gaining volume and a shrill edge. "You come here, you throw your money around to make yourself feel important, and you try to ruin your brother's happiness on his special night. I have had enough of your arrogance." I looked at my father, my eyes pleading with him. "Do something. Say something. Be a father." He just stared at the floor, a statue of cowardice, a monument to a lifetime of silent complicity. That's when she delivered the final blow. Stepping forward, she lowered her voice into a theatrical, trembling whisper that was somehow louder and more piercing than a shout. "I can't even stand to look at you," she said, her words laced with the venom of a lifetime of resentment. "This is a celebration for family. And you," her voice dripped with contempt, "you are not family." She then turned to the rest of the room, her arms spread wide as if she were a tragic actress on a stage. Her voice rose to a full-blown, blood-curdling scream. "You're not welcome here. Get out." The accusation, the banishment, hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I saw Mr. Miller, a man who had been my grandfather's closest friend, a respected business leader in his own right, staring at our table, his face a mask of shock and profound disappointment. I saw Dee Carroll, my mother's own sister, her hand covering her mouth in horror, but no one spoke up for me, not a single person. My decision was made in that moment of absolute ringing silence. It wasn't about anger anymore. It was about a terrible final clarity. I was a tool to them. My love, my hope, my promise. They were all just assets to be leveraged, a means to an end. I gave them exactly what they wanted. I left. My quiet okay was not a surrender. It was an acceptance of the truth. As I walked that long, lonely walk to the exit, I felt the entire performance crumble behind me. The carefully constructed facade of the happy, successful Harrison family shattering into a million pieces. They had finally, officially pushed me out of the family. They just didn't realize that I was the one holding up the entire building. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and silence. There was no rage-fueled music, no tearful phone calls. There was just a profound, hollow emptiness, a vacuum where 32 years of hope and effort used to be. The $50,000 hole in my bank account was nothing compared to the void that had opened up in my life. I had been trying to buy my way into a family that had already sold me out for the price of a loan extension. My apartment, usually my sanctuary of clean lines, quiet order, and breathtaking city views, felt cold and sterile, felt like a hotel suite. I sat on my expensive leather sofa, the twinkling city lights spreading out below me like a blanket of scattered jewels. And for the first time, I didn't see a view I had earned. I saw a gilded cage I had built for myself, a life meticulously structured around trying to win the approval of people who were fundamentally incapable of giving it. The entire foundation of my motivation was a lie. That night, I did something I had been putting off for years, something I had always considered a weakness. I went online and found the website for a highly recommended therapist. I filled out the new patient form, my fingers moving mechanically over the keyboard, and booked the soonest available virtual appointment. It was for the next afternoon. The next morning, the storm I had unleashed began to make landfall. It started not with a bang, but with a series of quiet digital pings. My inbox was flooded with emails, all forwarded from my lawyer, Daniel. The subject lines were a symphony of corporate panic and fury. Urgent. Unpaid invoice #743B. The Grand Oak Ballroom. Formal dispute notification. Harrison 30th anniversary event. Final demand for payment Class Act catering. Interspersed among them was a single, curt email from a lawyer I didn't recognize, a Mr. Finch. The subject, Breach of Contract, Harrison Family Agreement. I read the email. It was full of blustering legal threats, talking about verbal commitments and detrimental reliance. They were already trying to spin my promise to my grandfather into a legally binding contract to bail them out. It was so audacious, so twisted, it was almost funny. They thought they could sue me for a promise they had so thoroughly and publicly desecrated. I forwarded them all to Daniel with a simple, two-word note, "Handle this." His reply came back in minutes. "Already on it. Don't engage with them directly. Let them talk to me." Later that day, I had my first video call with Dr. Evans. She was a woman in her late 60s with kind, intelligent eyes and a calm, no-nonsense demeanor that I immediately respected. I laid out the whole sordid story, from my grandfather's promise on the porch to my mother's shriek in the ballroom. I expected pity, or maybe a clinical diagnosis of my obvious emotional dysfunction. Instead, she just listened intently, nodding slowly. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "It sounds," she said finally, her voice gentle but firm, "utterly exhausting." The simplicity of her words, the sheer accuracy of them, almost broke me. "It has been," I admitted, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. It was the relief of being seen. "Alex," she said, her gaze steady and direct through the screen. "In families with dynamics like yours, everyone unconsciously takes on a role to keep the system, however broken, in balance. From what you've told me, your brother was cast as the golden child, the one who can do no wrong and must be protected at all costs. Your parents are the enablers, sacrificing everything, including their other children, to maintain that protection. And you, Alex, you have been cast in the role of the rescuer." I stared at her. "The rescuer?" "Yes, you're the one who is supposed to be stable, successful, and endlessly resourceful. You're the one who swoops in with your success and your money to fix the problems the others create. Your success doesn't just make them jealous. It also makes them feel secure. They resent you for it, but they also depend on it. It's a terrible, paradoxical trap." "So what happens now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Now?" she said, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "You've just quit your role. You've walked off the stage in the middle of the most important act of the play. And now, for the first time, they have no rescuer. They have to face the consequences of their own actions. The real question is, Alex, are you prepared to face the consequences of yours? Are you prepared to handle the guilt they will try to heap on you for no longer playing your part?" Her question hung in the air long after the call ended. Was I prepared? I had spent my entire life cleaning up their messes, emotionally and financially. Quitting that role felt like cutting off a limb. There was a strange, toxic guilt gnawing at me, the deeply ingrained, irrational feeling that I was responsible for them, that I had abandoned them in their time of need, even though they had manufactured that need themselves. That evening, my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Alex, it's your Aunt Carol. I am so sorry for what happened at that party. What my sister did was unforgivable. I was too shocked to say anything at the moment, and I'll regret that forever. But I just wanted you to know that not everyone in that room agreed with her. I'm on your side." A small crack of light in the suffocating darkness. I texted back a simple, "Thank you, Carol. It means more than you know." But I knew the storm was far from over. The emails and legal threats were just the opening salvos. The real confrontation, the personal one, was yet to come. I spent the rest of the day in a strange, nerve-wracking limbo, caught between the exhilarating relief of liberation and the powerful gravitational pull of a lifetime of duty. I had walked out of the ballroom, but a part of me was still standing in that cold, lonely corner, waiting for an apology that I knew, with absolute certainty, would never come. Dr. Evans was right. The play was in chaos, and the lead actors were about to come looking for their missing star. They didn't storm my office. They didn't ambush me in public. That would have been too overt, too messy. Their methods were always more insidious. They came to my home, 3 days after the party, on a Thursday afternoon, my doorman buzzed up. "Mr. Harrison, your family is here to see you." The words were delivered in a flat, neutral tone, but they landed like a punch to the solar plexus. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trying to escape its cage. This was it, the confrontation. I took a steadying breath, walked to the mirror in the hallway, and straightened my shirt. I looked myself in the eye. No more rescuing, I told myself. Just the truth. "Send them up," I said into the intercom, my voice surprisingly calm. When I opened the door, they looked smaller than I remembered. The anger and arrogance from the party had evaporated, replaced by a threadbare desperation. My mother's face was pale and drawn, her eyes puffy and ringed with red. The fury was gone, replaced by a raw, gnawing anxiety. My father looked a decade older, his shoulders permanently stooped as if under an invisible weight. And Ryan just looked lost, like a child who had wandered away from his parents at the mall. His usual bravado completely gone. I didn't invite them in, not in the traditional sense. I just stepped back from the doorway, a silent, unsmiling sentinel, and let them enter. They shuffled into the spacious foyer of my apartment, their worn-out shoes looking out of place on the polished hardwood floors. They looked around my home, a space I had built with my own success, as if it were a foreign country, a place they couldn't comprehend. My father, predictably, was the one designated to speak first, to be the voice of reason. His own voice was raspy, weak. "Alex, we need to talk. About the agreement." "The agreement?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. I didn't move from my spot by the door. I let them stand awkwardly in the middle of the room. "I'm not sure which agreement you're referring to. The one where I agreed to honor my grandfather? Or the one where you agreed to humiliate me in front of 100 people?" "Son, don't," my father pleaded, taking a half-step forward. "This is serious." "The money, Alex," my mother cut in, her voice trembling with a barely suppressed panic. The niceties were over. The caterers, the ballroom, the florist, they're calling us nonstop. They're threatening to sue. "You started this. You have to fix it. Fix this." I repeated the words slowly, letting them hang in the air like poison. I finally moved, walking past them into the living room. I didn't sit. I stood by my large windows, the sprawling city behind me like my own personal army. I looked from her to my father, then to Ryan. "I believe your exact words were, 'Get out.' You made it quite clear that I, and by extension my resources, were no longer welcome in your lives. I was simply honoring your request." "Don't be so dramatic, Alex," Ryan mumbled, finding a sliver of his old, reflexive arrogance. "You know we didn't mean it like that." I laughed, a cold, bitter, humorless sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. "Oh, I think you meant it, Ryan. Every single word. But you're right, we're not here to talk about my feelings. You're not interested in those. We're here to talk about the agreement." I walked over to the sleek, modern coffee table that sat in the center of the room. On it was a thin, black file folder. I picked it up. "I had my lawyer, Daniel, look over the share transfer agreement again," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the glass table. I looked directly at my father. It's a fascinating read. As with most agreements of this nature, it's predicated on a standard good faith and fair dealing clause. It legally assumes that the company for which the shares are being purchased is operating transparently, honestly, and legally. I let that sink in. I saw a flicker of panic in my father's eyes. He knew where this was going. "Which brings me," I said, my voice dropping, "to this." I opened the folder and slid a document across the polished surface of the table toward him. It was a copy of the share transfer agreement we had both signed. Then, I pulled out a second document and placed it neatly on top of the first. It was a series of bank statements. Not mine. They were for a shell corporation named Ry4ns144 LLC, registered to a P.O. box. And the sole signatory was my brother, Ryan Harrison. The statements showed a series of large, regular wire transfers from the main operating account of Harrison Textiles into this shell. "It turns out," I continued, My eyes locked on Ryan, who had gone dead white, his face looking like a sheet of paper. That my dear brother has been using the family business as his personal piggy bank for the better part of 2 years, taking out loans against company assets he didn't fully own, then funneling the money into this side venture of his. A venture, I might add, that went spectacularly bust about 6 months ago. He's been cooking the books, shuffling numbers around, trying to cover his tracks. But a good forensic accountant, and believe me, I hired the best, can find anything. I looked at my parents, whose faces had crumpled in horror and disbelief. Not at Ryan's actions, but at the fact that I had discovered them. "You knew," I said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. You both knew the company was hollowed out. You knew it was drowning in debt created by his mistakes. You knew the books were a work of fiction. My mother opened her mouth, a strangled gasp escaping, but no words followed. She looked at her precious son, her golden child, with eyes full of terror. "The party," I said, connecting the final dots for them. My voice laced with the ice of dawning realization. The $50,000 gift. It was never about my grandfather's legacy. It was never about your anniversary. It was a desperate, last-ditch effort to get a cash infusion to pacify your creditors just long enough to secure another loan to cover up his fraud. You didn't just want my money. You wanted to make me an unwitting accomplice. You wanted my good faith payment to be the final ingredient in your toxic, fraudulent stew. Silence. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the city traffic far below, a world away from this suffocating family drama. "The legal term for what he did," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper as I looked at Ryan, "is embezzlement. The legal term for what you two did," I looked at my parents, "by knowingly hiding it and trying to secure funds under false pretenses, is conspiracy to commit fraud." I tapped the folder with a single finger. The sound was like a gavel striking down. "The share purchase agreement is null and void. There was no good faith. There was no fair dealing. There was only deception. Therefore, you have no claim on my money. You have no claim on me." My mother finally broke. A sob, a terrible, wrenching sound, tore from her throat. She sank onto my sofa, her face in her hands. "We were just trying to protect him," she wept, her words muffled and incoherent. "He's your brother. And what am I?" I asked, the question filled with the accumulated pain of 1,000 slights, a million moments of being second best, of being the solution but never the sun. "What am I to you?" No one had an answer. They just stared, their faces a mixture of shame, fear, and defeat. I walked to the door and opened it, letting the light from the hallway spill into the dim room. "I think this conversation is over." They left the way they came, in a shroud of humiliated silence. My father wouldn't look at me. Ryan stumbled past as if in a daze. My mother was the last to leave, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes, when they met mine for a fleeting second, held not remorse, but a flash of pure, unadulterated hatred. As the door clicked shut, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel the sweet satisfaction of revenge. I just felt the crushing weight of the truth. I had won. I had checkmated them with facts and figures. But in the process, I had been forced to prove, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that the family I had spent my entire life trying to earn a place in had never really existed at all. The days that followed were defined by a profound and unsettling quiet. The angry emails from vendors stopped. The blustering legal threats from Mr. Finch vanished. It seemed my final move on the chessboard had been so decisive, so utterly final, that it had scattered all the other pieces from the board. The silence from my family was absolute, a digital and emotional wall that was more imposing than any shouting match. It was a silence I had often craved, but now that I had it, it felt heavy and unnatural, like the eerie stillness in the air after a devastating tornado has passed through, leaving nothing but wreckage in its wake. 2 weeks later, the news broke. It wasn't a dramatic headline, just a small, dry notice in the local business journal's online edition, under the bankruptcies and foreclosures section. Harrison Textiles LLC files for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. It was a short, passionless paragraph, listing insurmountable debts, an inability to secure further financing, and the upcoming liquidation of all assets. The company my grandfather had built with his own two hands, the company that was supposed to be our family's story, was officially over. It was being dismantled, inventoried, and sold for parts. I read the article on my phone, sitting in my clean, orderly office overlooking the bustling city. There was no surge of victory, no feeling of, "I told you so." There was just a deep, profound, and hollow ache. An ache for my grandfather, for his hard work and his simple integrity. An ache for the 10-year-old boy on the porch steps, who once believed his family's love was something he could earn if he just tried hard enough, if he was just smart enough, successful enough. That afternoon, I had another session with Dr. Evans. I told her about the bankruptcy notice. "How do you feel about it?" she asked, her voice gentle, inviting honesty. "Empty," I confessed, the word feeling inadequate. "I feel like I'm the one who burned it all to the ground. My grandfather's legacy. I feel like I'm the one who destroyed it." Dr. Evans listened, her expression thoughtful. "Let me ask you something, Alex," she said after a moment. "What, to you, was your grandfather's true legacy? Was it the company itself, a collection of buildings, machinery, assets, and liabilities? Or was it the principles he built it on? Integrity, honesty, quality, a good name." "The principles, of course," I said without hesitation. "And were those principles being honored in the way the company was being run in its final years?" she asked, her question a gentle but precise probe. "No," I admitted, the truth sharp and clear. "It was all lies, deceit. It was a rotting facade." "Then you didn't destroy his legacy," she said, her words landing with the force of a revelation. "You refused to participate in its desecration. You refused to let his good name be buried under a mountain of fraud and deceit. Sometimes, Alex, the most honorable and loving thing you can do for something is to let it go, so it can end with the dignity it deserves, instead of allowing it to fester into a corrupt and unrecognizable version of itself." Her words were a key turning a lock deep inside me I didn't even know was rusted shut. The heavy shroud of guilt, the irrational feeling that I was the villain of the story, began to lift, replaced by a fragile sense of peace. I hadn't been the executioner. I had been the one who refused to keep funding a slow, painful, and dishonest death. The process of untangling myself from the wreckage was slow and clinical. There were legal meetings, phone calls with the bankruptcy trustee. I was compelled to provide the evidence of Ryan's embezzlement. I didn't do it out of spite or revenge, but out of a simple, clean need for the truth to be on the official record. I owed that much to my grandfather's memory. Through the legal grapevine, I learned that Ryan, facing the very real threat of criminal charges, had taken a plea deal that involved massive fines, a long period of probation, and hundreds of hours of community service. My parents had sold their large family home, the home I grew up in, the one filled with so many complicated memories, to cover his legal fees and the initial restitution payments. They moved into a small, rented condo on the other side of town. The Harrison Empire, such as it was, had fallen. During this time, I focused on my own life with a singular, almost manic intensity. I threw myself into my work, closing a major deal that had been languishing for months. I reconnected with old college friends I had neglected for years, admitting to them for the first time the true extent of my family's toxicity. I started exercising again, the physical exhaustion a welcome antidote to the emotional turmoil. I was rebuilding, brick by brick, a life that wasn't defined by my family's expectations, their drama, or their bottomless need. But at night, in the quiet moments before sleep, the questions still sometimes haunted me. Had I done the right thing? Could there have been another way? I was free, but my freedom had come at a terrible, irrevocable cost. It was a victory that felt, in so many ways, like a profound and solitary loss. I had won the war, but I was standing all alone on the silent, scarred battlefield. The next 8 months were a quiet, deliberate lesson in rebuilding. It wasn't just about rebuilding a life free from family drama. It was about rebuilding a self, a sense of purpose that wasn't tied to being the rescuer. Dr. Evans had given me some advice that stuck with me. "Your skills in building systems," in seeing potential and mitigating risk, she'd said, could be used for more than just profit. They could be used to build people up. Taking her words to heart, I joined the advisory board of a local nonprofit called Launchpad, an organization that mentored young entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds. It was grounding. It was real. I sat in community centers and college library basements, listening to bright-eyed, ambitious kids with brilliant ideas but no resources and no connections. I helped a young woman who had developed a genius app for community gardening to write her first business plan. I helped a pair of brothers who wanted to start an eco-friendly cleaning service to navigate the labyrinth of small business loans. I helped them avoid the pitfalls I knew all too well. For the first time in a long time, I felt like my success was serving a purpose that was clean and uncomplicated. I was helping people build their own legacies the right way from the ground up with honesty and hard work. It was at one of Launchpad's low-key networking mixers, an event held in a stuffy university conference room with bad coffee and an incredible, palpable energy of hope, that I met Michael. He was a doctor, an emergency room physician, who volunteered his time on the board, offering advice and mentorship to startups in the healthcare tech space. He had a quiet confidence and a warm, easy smile that made you feel instantly at ease. He wasn't flashy or loud. He was just present. Our first conversation wasn't the typical networking dance of exchanging job titles and veiled boasts. We spent 20 minutes huddled in a corner, excitedly brainstorming a marketing strategy for a young woman who had developed a free, multilingual health screening app for recent immigrants. We connected over a shared passion for a project that had nothing to do with us. Our relationship grew organically from that shared ground. We started with coffee to discuss Launchpad business, which turned into long dinners where we talked about everything and nothing. He told me about the controlled chaos of the ER, the lives he saved, the ones he couldn't. I, in turn, told him about my family. I laid out the whole ugly, complicated story one evening, sitting in a quiet corner of an old Italian restaurant. I expected him to be shocked, or to offer pity or easy platitudes. He did none of those things. He just listened intently, his eyes full of understanding. When I finally finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Wow," he said softly. "It sounds like you spent 30 years trying to save your family. And in the end, you had to choose to save yourself. That's the hardest and bravest thing in the world to do." With him, I didn't feel like the rescuer or the ATM. I just felt like Alex. He was interested in my thoughts, not my bank balance. He valued my character, not my connections. Life started to have color and texture again. My business was thriving, more so now that I was leading it with a clear head, free from the emotional baggage that had clouded my judgment for so long. I sold the sterile downtown apartment and bought a house with a small yard and big windows that let in the light. I was surrounded by a new family, one I had chosen. Good friends like Sarah, my fellow board members at Launchpad who shared my desire to give back, and, most importantly, Michael. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. My first instinct, a holdover from the bad old days, was to ignore it. But I was trying to be more open, less guarded. I answered it. "Hello." There was a pause on the other end, then a hesitant, unfamiliar voice. "Alex." It was Ryan, but he sounded different. The usual slick, confident cadence was gone, replaced by something rougher, more uncertain. I almost hung up. A dozen angry, sarcastic retorts died on my tongue. Instead, I took a breath and said, "What do you want, Ryan?" I'm not calling to ask for money," he said quickly, the words tumbling out in a rush, as if he expected me to hang up at any second. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything, ever. I'm doing this thing. I have an idea. It's really small. A specialty woodworking business. Custom-made furniture. I'm doing it all myself in the garage of Mom and Dad's condo. I was wondering if I could buy you a coffee and just run the idea by you. Not for money, just for some advice. On the business side, that's all." I was silent for a long time, stunned. The old Alex would have either written a check just to make him go away, or slammed the phone down with a lecture. The new Alex, the one who had spent months with Dr. Evans learning about boundaries and the possibility of change, considered it. He wasn't asking for a rescue. He was asking for a map. He was, for the first time in his life, admitting he didn't have all the answers. "Okay, Ryan," I said finally, my voice even. "There's a coffee shop on Main Street, halfway between your side of town and mine. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. My treat." I went to that meeting. He looked different, thinner, humbled. He had sawdust in his hair and the beginnings of calluses on his hands. He showed me his business plan, scribbled on a yellow legal pad. It was naive, full of holes, but it had a core of something genuine, something passionate. For 30 minutes, I wasn't his resentful older brother. I was just a successful entrepreneur mentoring a novice. I listened. I gave him honest, constructive feedback. I told him which parts were weak, where his numbers were unrealistic, and which of his designs had real potential. I didn't offer him a single dollar. I didn't offer him a job or a connection. All I offered was 30 minutes of my time and the professional advice he had never bothered to ask for before. When we stood up to leave, he looked me in the eye. His own eyes were clear for once. "Thank you, Alex," he said. "Really, thank you." And for the first time in my life, I believed he actually meant it. It wasn't a solution. It wasn't a grand reconciliation. It was just a cup of coffee. But it felt like a new beginning. A relationship, if there was to be one, that would be built on a foundation of reality with clear, unshakable boundaries. A few months later, Michael and I were hiking a trail in the mountains that ringed the city. It was a perfect autumn day. The air was crisp and smelled of pine and damp earth, and the leaves on the trees were a breathtaking riot of red, orange, and gold. It was peaceful, the kind of deep, resonant peace that isn't just the absence of noise, but the presence of something whole and good. My phone buzzed in the pocket of my jacket. I pulled it out, expecting a work email. Instead, it was a picture message from my Aunt Carol. She sent them occasionally, little updates I never asked for but secretly appreciated. It was a photo of my nephew, Leo, Ryan's son, grinning from ear to ear, his face smeared with chocolate frosting from his 5th birthday cake. He was standing in the small, patchy yard of my parents' rented condo, and in the background, out of focus, I could see a simple, beautifully carved wooden birdhouse hanging from the branch of a small tree. A flicker of Ryan's new beginning. A small sign of something being built instead of something being broken. I smiled a genuine, unburdened smile. After the bankruptcy, I had set up a small, anonymous educational trust for Leo, managed by a third-party financial firm. It was my one remaining indirect connection, a firewall-protected way to ensure that one innocent person in that family had a chance at a future he deserved, without me having to get drawn back into the toxic gravitational pull of their lives. Michael came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder as he looked at the screen. "Good news?" he asked, his voice warm. "Yeah," I said, my voice quiet, full of an emotion I couldn't quite name. "Good news." I put the phone back in my pocket, turning my attention from the small screen to the vast, sprawling vista in front of us. I realized then, standing on that mountain with the world at my feet, that I had spent so much of my life chasing a false idea of family, a legacy defined by a name on a building, by blood and obligation. I thought my role was to be the rescuer, the provider, the one who held it all together, no matter the cost to myself. But my real legacy wasn't about a company I was forced to let die. It was about the choices I made when everything fell apart. I chose honesty over lies. I chose self-respect over toxic duty. I chose to build a new life, a new home, a new family, with people who saw me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. My family is not defined by blood anymore. It's defined by respect, by laughter, by shared values, by showing up for each other in good times and bad. It's my friends like Sarah, who always told me the truth, even when I didn't want to hear it. It's my fellow board members at Launchpad, who share my passion for building something meaningful. It's Michael, who taught me that love isn't about rescuing someone, but about walking beside them. You can love people from a distance. You can wish them well, hope they find their way, and still choose to protect your own hard-won peace. My grandfather wanted me to take care of his legacy. And in the end, standing here a whole and happy man, I believe I finally have. Just not in the way either of us ever expected.